Alrighty, it's December, the month that you get to ask yourself, have I reached the goals that I settled earlier this year? And if you're thinking, nah, it is actually okay. It is okay to not reach all the goals you've settled. It is okay if you're still feeling and thinking change is something that is so tricky and hard to sustain, so challenging. All we hope is you feel empowered, enabled, and enactable to effect change for yourself, friends and families, and the earth, because you are here today. Hello to everyone joining us from all over the world. Welcome to Change 2020 December event. If this is your second, third, or fourth time joining us, welcome back. If it is your first time seeing us, welcome. On behalf of the entire SMG team and co-chairs of Change 2020, including myself, Jaewon Kim, and my mate, Alex Campbell, we welcome you all to this final event of this year. Before we begin today, could I please ask you to mute your mics so that we can avoid any background noises? And if you haven't already, also please turn off your video so we can ensure the best possible streaming quality for this event. Also, today's event is being recorded and it will be shared on our YouTube channel following this event. And we would like to pay our respect to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders people before we begin this event. This Change 2020 series is an online event proudly brought to you by Social Marketing Griffith for 100% free. We are the world's largest university-based social marketing research center, and the Brand Change 2020 conference is in its third year, continuing to grow a behavior change science network, and just been brought in online because of COVID this year. Our team's commitment behind the scene is proven by breaking records of registrations and your presence today, and our awesome speakers who kept their words for yes to keep this event alive. So thank you, and let me introduce their awesomeness. Today, we have three thought-provoking speakers who will share with you how to leverage off existing networks, building a loyal tribe of followers, and enhance community involvement. We guarantee these three speakers will guide you to develop a strategy or fine-tune strategies you've already tried to maintain the change that will happen and has happened. Our first speaker, Dina Pozzo, will open this event by sharing her scientific key on how to keep you and everyone's change energy high and stable. Then our second speaker, Rowena Marit, will showcase how to build a Nobel Prize example of social marketing practice by working with whom and why. Next, Samir Deshpande, our third speaker, will take you to a social hybrid model, a research suggesting you your do's and don'ts to build a change tribe. To enjoy this awesome learning journey, please engage with us through any polls that may pop into your screen and ask any questions using the chat function. It's on the bottom of Zoom that you're in the room at the moment. Click on the chat function and ask us any questions, please. Alex will be curating questions in the background, and we will have one united Q&A session after all three speakers. Alrighty, let's bring our very first speaker for our December event. Director of INSEUM, Dina Pozzo, is a facilitator, coach, speaker who opens doors and let you explore the other side of yourself. With more than 25 years of experience in learning and organizational development, both locally and internationally, her ultimate aim is to broaden minds and build skills, capacity, and confidence, empowering individuals to implement successful plans of action for sustainability and to have positive impact on organizational goals. Please join me in welcoming Dina.
Thank you so much. I just had a couple of technical difficulties there, but thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. As you know, my name is Dina, and my purpose is to open doors. These may be doors that we have firmly and intentionally shut in our past. They may be doors that we've wandered past aimlessly, or they may be doors in our future. And in my practice of leadership and teams development, I encourage people to open these doors and explore and honour what's on the other side. The specific door that I invite you to open today is the one that explores courage, and particularly the courage to change. Whether this is the courage for a personal change or the courage to inspire change in others in a system. I'm going to share two things with you and then invite you to action. The two things that I'm going to share with you are a story of when I inspired change in a system, and then secondly, the key skills required to be courageous, which are observable, teachable, and measurable. As you listen, I invite you to think about a change that you would like to implement and or inspire, whether you are leading a tribe to change or whether you're part of that tribe. As you listen, I want you to consider that the difference between knowing and doing is courage. This photo was taken on my last day of year 11. The photo's from quite some years ago, obviously pre-digital, and so I had to scan it. It's a little bit grainy. Anyway, this photo represents the change that I instigated back in year 11. That's me in the green pinafore with two of my friends, Susie and Doreen. We actually need to rewind approximately 8 weeks prior to this day. It was a school day and an announcement came over the PA system asking a number of girls, I went to an all-girls school, by name to go to the library. My name wasn't called out, but being the curious person that I am, some people call it nosy, I took myself off to the library and I saw a queue of girls lined up. And as one girl came out of one of the library rooms, another girl went in. The thing that the majority of girls coming out of the library had in common was that they were in tears. And at that point in my life, my curiosity was very great. And I asked these girls what was taking place. The strong recommendation to each of these girls was that they should not attempt year 12 as it would be too hard for them and far too demoralising. Now, interpretation, not that you need it, it wouldn't be good for our pass rate. Firstly, I was stunned that this was even taking place. Really? Is this the school that I loved, where I had so many good friends, great teachers and amazing memories? This was soon replaced by anger. How dare someone recommend that a student should not even try? I had a visceral response to this, and I still feel it today when I think about it and when I talk about it. You know, I can feel my jaw clenching now and a knot in my gut and a tightness in my head and my heart. My two core values are fairness and love, and both of these values have been pushed. This certainly wasn't fair. You know, how can anyone say, yes, you can, but, you know, I'm sorry, you can't? Fairness is about giving everyone the same opportunity. And love. Some of my closest friends have been strongly encouraged not to attempt year 12. Why and should I have been allowed to try year 12, but they were not? They were not. That very night, rightly or wrongly, I tend to act quickly when my values are pushed, and this is evident throughout my life. I spoke to my mum about this, and I said, I can't do year 12 at a school that behaves in this way. We had a long chat about it, and while Mum didn't think it was a good idea to do year 12 at another school, she backed me. We talked about this for a few more days, as well as my doing research and making inquiries as to where I could and should do year 12, you know, trying to find the best option to minimise the stress of doing year 12 at another school. I then made a decision. I made an appointment to see one of the senior staff members at the school to tell her that I would be doing year 12 at a different school. And the response from her was quite animated from this staff member. You know, it was along the lines of, what are you thinking? You're throwing your life away. I'm going to call your mum and tell her. To which I simply replied, she already knows. The upshot, the short version of this story, is that the school changed its recommendations and offered the opportunity for all of the girls to do Year 12 should they choose. While I was thrilled by this outcome, I still did Year 12 elsewhere. I felt I would be compromising my values if I did what I thought was an about face. Don't get me wrong, I loved Years 7 to 11, but I felt really strongly about this situation. As a side note, I also loved Year 12 in my new school. As one of a number of students completing Year 11, I was very honoured to be asked to give the Year 11 graduation speech. And curiously, it was about change and the transitions we had made to that date and would continue to make as we lived life. Now, some of you may be thinking, wow, that was reckless, doing Year 12 somewhere else. But it paid off. The school changed its policies and I'm here today. And some of you may be thinking, wow, that was courageous. I'll go with the courage piece for now, but I will loop back to recklessness as well. So the courage piece. What are the skills of courage and how do they relate to the changes I experienced at that time? When we think of the changes, if we start there, they're quite evident. Changes for me included going to a new school to complete Year 12, new teachers, new friends, a new route to get to school and more. But the biggest change was the change to the system, which was the school where I did Years 7 to 11. The school changed its policies so that everyone could attend Year 12. So let's look a bit more closely at courage. According to the research of Dr. Brené Brown, courage is comprised of the 4 key skills you see on your screen right now: vulnerability, values, trust, and learning to rise, where learning to rise is about building resilience and building well-being. I'll start with values. We're often pushed to inspire, instigate change, personal or systemic, when our values are pushed. Think about when your values have been pushed. What have you done? Now, please don't get me wrong. It's not as simple as that. But I do know that this photograph you're looking at right now is how it feels when I'm living my values. It feels liberating, uplifting, energizing. I feel like I can take on the world. Change also requires vulnerability. Now, simply defined, vulnerability is the emotion we feel during times of uncertainty, and with change, there is uncertainty, times of risk and emotional exposure. Vulnerability is the willingness to show up and be seen with no guarantee of outcome. Thinking of my story, even though I felt quite strong in my convictions, I was also vulnerable. In telling mum of my plans, how would she react? Would she support me? In telling others and in acting on my decision, how would they react? Would they think like that senior staff member that I spoke to? Would I be shamed by my thoughts and my actions, by what was important to me? How would I cope with going to a new school? Would I even succeed? So there was risk and vulnerability in that. Then we have the beautiful and yet somewhat mysterious skill that is trust. Did I trust myself on this? Did I back myself that I could actually succeed in changing anything? I think that these questions I've actually asked myself in hindsight, not necessarily at the time. And then we have the 4th skill of courage, and that is learning to rise, resilience. Again, in hindsight, I know that due to life events, I had already been building my resilience up to this point. When I look back at my grade 6 yearbook, almost every teacher who wrote in it wrote of the courage, of the bravery that I had demonstrated in primary school, particularly in grade 6 when my father had died earlier that year. But let's loop back to recklessness for a minute. Courage is this beautiful skill that sits in the middle of a continuum. Now, at this end of the continuum, and it's quite a way away, is recklessness. And then at this end of the continuum, again, quite a way away, is cowardice. If I was to give advice to my younger self, based on the work I've done in building courageous individuals, teams and organisations and cultures, I would suggest taking time to reflect before acting. And I did this to some degree with Mum, but perhaps not quite as specifically as what I'm about to suggest now. When considering change, where there is risk, when considering courageous action, I encourage you to ask yourself the 3 questions that are on screen now. The first question to ask yourself is, to what extent is this action, is this change worthwhile? To what extent is this action, this change risky? And then based on your reflection on those 2 questions, then making a decision reacting. And, you know, asking yourself the question, to what extent am I willing to take this action to make this change? Now, I need to be really clear here. There's no magic formula. You know, if risk is this, but worthwhile is that, you know, you should act. No, there's no magic formula. But what this reflection does, it gives you an opportunity to stop. And whether it's for 5 minutes or 5 days, if you stop and reflect, you're more likely to stay in courage rather than tip into recklessness or cowardice. Remember too, sometimes it takes courage to do nothing. A couple of other key points about change and courage. Courage looks different for different people. What I deem to be a courageous act, you may not, and vice versa. What I need courage for might be different to what you need courage for. And there are different types of courage. Often when we think of courage, we think of the firefighter, the healthcare worker, the football player, who are all demonstrating physical courage. They're putting their physicality at risk. Or we think of the person who's fighting hard to be healthy, possibly fighting for life, who is demonstrating vital courage. There is also moral courage, and that's the courage to stand up for what is right, for what you believe in, to stand up for a cause, to stand up and speak up for what is okay and what is not okay. Moral courage is linked very closely to our values, which in turn are linked to society's values. It's no surprise that there are many definitions of courage through the ages, and that each of these definitions is linked to what society values at that given point in time. So I've shared my story of inspiring courage in a system, which was linked very strongly to my personal values of fairness and love. And I've shared with you the 4 skills to build courage. And when we think of change, uncertainty, risk, there's vulnerability. And if there's vulnerability, there's courage. Those 4 skills being vulnerability, values, trust, and learning to rise. I mentioned I would then have an ask of you. And that ask is to turn the knowing into the doing. There are many reasons for change and courage right now. What is the change that you would like to see? Now that you know, what will you do? If you'd like to build your courage, I do invite you to visit our website, Leading with Courage, where in addition to finding courage building programs that we offer, you will also be inspired by many courageous stories of many diverse people, and you'll also find freely available resources. And I'm going to leave you with this. Gandhi spoke about, be the change you wish to see in the world. I say, and apologies to Gandhi, be the courage you wish to see in the world. Thank you for listening.
Just brilliant. Thank you so much for an inspiring and courageous talk, Tina. I particularly found different types of courage so interesting. Thought building a following or movement of change starts with you, because we are all born with the trait of courage. And I really like the message of what you've said about the vulnerability is actually telling us that there's courage in us. Can feel the really, really positive vibe coming through. Really good. So thank you so much for the great talk, Dina. The next one, we have Dr. Rowena Marriott. Director of Millbank of Social Marketing, and was the founding member and head of research at National Social Marketing Centre in London. Rowena has nearly 15 or maybe more than that years of experience conducting research and evaluating behaviour change projects. And she's the current social behaviour change communications specialist of the World Food Programme. Please join me in welcoming Rowena.
Okay, so hopefully everybody can see and hear me. And hello from a cold and freezing UK at the moment, where it's 6 a.m, so very dark still outside me. So thank you very much for having me here today to talk about the work I'm doing at the World Food Programme. So the World Food Programme is probably best known for the food drops and the food distribution work that it does in some of the most deprived communities across the world. This year we were humbled and so proud to be actually awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for the work that we do in relation to alleviating hunger and malnutrition across the globe. Sorry, next slide, thank you. So this is, as you can see from the picture, this is probably what we're best known for. But here you can see that we actually work in over 80 countries. The blue spots are the countries we work in, and the red are the emergency areas. So although we're best known for the food drop work that we do, we actually do lots of other programs. We do programs around school feeding, gender sensitivity. We do work with smallholder farmers to try and create more sustainability in that aspect. And we do a lot of work around nutrition. And it's with the nutrition team where I sit and where I work. And so I work in the regional bureau in Cairo. So we cover a vast area from Algeria all the way around to Tajikistan, which is in Central Asia. Within a lot of the countries I work, they have very difficult situations financially, difficult situations because of conflict or history of conflict. And they also have what's called this triple burden of malnutrition. So the triple burden of malnutrition means often within the same communities, they have stunting, so they have undernourishment. They have also high micronutrient deficiencies, such as anemia, and they have the other extreme. They have high rates of overweight and obesity. And I think this concept of overweight and obesity is often seen as a developing countries problem, but actually they often have the same rates as we do, for example, in the UK. I really loved the presentation that we've just heard from Dina. It was absolutely awe-inspiring, and it's always difficult to go after such a good presentation. But I think this concept of courage is absolutely vital in the work that we do, because the communities we work in, they are some of the most courageous people I have ever met in my life. Because just going to the well to get water can be fraught with danger, the fear of violence, the fear of rape, attack, just taking your kids to school or going to the market, it can be very, very dangerous. So they do courageous activities every single day. And on top of that, we're asking them to make changes in relation to their diet. And though these changes might seem simple and easy for us, it's actually often something that is perceived as going against their social norms, against their culture, against what they're used to. And the risks for them are very extreme. So if you go against your culture, if you go against your social norm, you risk being thrown out of your community and being isolated. And these are in countries where there are no safety net. So there are no hostels for domestic abuse. There is no system where you can get food necessarily on the state. So it's very high risk. And so they have to be incredibly courageous to make any change, even very small changes. Just to give you a couple of examples of this in relation to the work that I do. So we often try to get people to cook with less oil, especially in the countries where there is high obesity rates. And when they're cooking with less oil, their food doesn't seem as appealing to their husbands. And actually being a good cook is what is regarded as being a good wife. So if you're not cooking the food as your husband likes, then you're regarded as a bad wife and belittled often by not just the husband, but by the mother-in-law as well. Or we're trying to get pregnant and breastfeeding women to eat more high iron foods. But for them to eat high iron foods by themselves, it seems incredibly selfish. And often in the family situations, the men are served first, then the elders, then the children. So actually within these situations, the mother is served last. So for the mother to stand up and say, actually, I need to have special food when I'm pregnant, I need these high iron foods that are often seen as a luxury. It takes a lot of bravery and a lot of courage to be able to make that small change that we're asking of. Sorry, can you flip a couple of slides forward, please? Sorry, one more. And another. So based on all those factors and the issues that we're facing, sorry, go back. So based on those factors and the issues that we're facing, this is our approach to behaviour change. We have to make sure that we are empowering the people that we're working with, because disempowered people, wherever they are in the world, it's very difficult for them to make change. We try to work with the wider community, so with the husbands, the mother-in-laws, the religious leaders, etc., to create positive social norms so that it creates an environment where change is more feasible. And finally, we do positive reinforcement. So if people have made even just the slightest change, then we encourage them to, we celebrate those changes and encourage them to make just one tiny little change extra. Next slide, please. So based on this, these are the things we try to achieve, and this is the process that we do to try and achieve it. The first thing is we spend a lot of time understanding the history, values and culture, and we really can't underestimate the impact of that history on how we behave, the choices that we make, and we understand the problems that we're looking at in relation to that whole systems approach. So how does eating and how does the food that we cook fit into our values, our culture and our history and traditions? Then we look at the broader picture. We look at who are the potential influences, positive or negative, and what are the social norms? Because as I said, sometimes we're asking people to make changes that might be going against or perceived as going against their social norms. And we don't want to put people at risk. So we have to understand that the changes we're encouraging people to make will still keep people safe and not put them in danger. We do co-creation through all our programs of behaviour change, and this co-creation work is done to try and create a sense of ownership and to help people set targets that they think are achievable and doable within their community, as opposed to somebody like me going into the country and saying you must all do A, B and C. And finally, this is not an academic exercise for us. So we go out into the real world, we test it out very quickly. And if it works, we roll it out extremely quickly because we have to, because we're dealing with real life problems that need to be reacted to quickly. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to give you a couple of examples to show how we've done this in practice. The first one is about increasing consumption of iron-rich foods in Palestine. Now, on the surface, that doesn't seem very complex. You know, we just want people to eat a bit more red meat, a bit more spinach, certain pulses whilst they're pregnant or breastfeeding. So on the surface, it seems very simple ask. A lot of these foods are inexpensive, they're available. So in theory, it shouldn't be too difficult. However, we're trying to get women to make these changes in very difficult environments. So we're doing the work in Gaza, which I'm sure all of you know is a very movement restricted area. It's a very complex area. And we're doing it in Hebron, H2, which is a part of the West Bank that is very dangerous, very deprived, but also, again, very controlled from a movement point of view. I think when we went out and did work with the target audience, with the pregnant and breastfeeding women, to try and understand their current habits in relation to what they eat, what they cook, and explore just their lives as a whole, you know, what motivated them, what were their fears more generally. There were some things that really struck me. The first is they already feel as if they are bad parents. They know what they should do, they know what they should eat, they know what they should do with their children in relation to nutrition and just life in general. They just feel so worn down. And because they can't do those things, or they don't feel they can do those things, they feel like bad parents. And this really struck me, because the last thing we want is to make anybody feel like a bad parent when they are brilliant parents coping with the environment in which they do. Linked to this, they felt totally trapped, and to be honest, a lot of them are physically trapped, but they also felt totally trapped within their situation, their marital situation, their household situation. And this led to a feeling of fatalism, that they had no control over the outcomes of anything. They felt incredibly isolated. They weren't allowed to always go out of the house, or they weren't, because they couldn't breastfeed in public, for example. If they were breastfeeding, they felt stuck at home and isolated. And often within the households, they felt as if they were second-class citizens. So by that, I mean that in some cultures and in some of the countries I work, when you marry into a family, you then go and live with that family, and you do the cooking, the cleaning, and you look after the children as well. Because of this feeling of entrapment and feeling as if things weren't within their control, what struck me, I think, the most is that they had lost their ability to dream. And if you ask them about their own aspirations, their own dreams, their ambitions, they had none. They couldn't say. It wasn't even as if they could say, I'd like to cook a really nice meal tonight. All of that had just gone from them. It was that they were so disenchanted with the world. However, the one ray of light for them was their children, and they fondly remember their children's the first teeth, the first word, etc. And they craved a time when life seemed simpler, when they remembered when they were at school and they could play before marriage, when they wanted to have an education and they had dreams and ambitions of their own. Next slide, please. So based on this, we created a campaign, and we also created a lot of interventions, grassroots interventions. With the campaign, we kept the call to action very simple, because we didn't want, as I said, people to feel like worse parents. We didn't want them to feel guilty that they couldn't make big changes. So the call to action is your little wins add up to big things, and celebrate the small things. So we wanted to encourage them to make just tiny, tiny changes, encouraging them that actually making these small changes can lead to positive, bigger things in the longer run. Next slide, please. We also did other interventions. So we did comedy sketches. So there are some amazing, courageous, incredibly brave female comedians coming out of Gaza and coming out of West Bank at the moment. And to be a comedian in Gaza is a very difficult thing. To be a female comedian in Gaza, even more difficult. So we've been working with these fantastically wonderful and funny women, already trying to break social norms and challenge some of the myths and misunderstandings around what you can do, what you can't do. And so we've tried to work with them to create comedy sketches to challenge some of the myths and misunderstandings around nutrition. We've created cooking clubs, not to teach the women how to cook, but more that it's a way to break the social isolation. So going to a cooking club is seen as a socially acceptable activity for women to do. Therefore, they have the permission of their husbands to go to the cooking clubs. But it's really a social event for women to get together, to talk, to chat, and to discuss everyday things. We've done engagement with religious leaders to try and reach the men, and we've done motivational interview training with the healthcare professionals so they can sit down with the women and, instead of preaching to them about what they should and shouldn't eat, try to help the women think about very small changes that they could realistically make. Next slide, please. The final example I wanted to share with you is in relation to Jordan. Now, Jordan is, for me, it's the most beautiful, amazing country, but actually, just to put it in perspective, I've been working in Jordan for the last 10 years, and within that time, the population has doubled because of the conflict currently in Syria. So they have these huge refugee camps, these Syrian refugee camps. And within these refugee camps, there is this triple burden of malnutrition. So there is an increasing and worrying trend around obesity and overweight rates. But also within the host Jordanian communities, there is this growing overweight and obese rates as well. Predominantly because of the sugar consumption that they have. For there, if you have a cup of tea, it's normally full of sugar, more sugar than water kind of concept. So the project we're doing is trying to reduce sugar consumption, both within the refugee camps and within the host communities. Next slide, please. So we did research again with the target audience. Sorry, can you skip to the next slide, please? Thank you. We did, no, back one. We did research with the target audience. And some of the things we found out is often, again, the families, not just the mothers, but the husbands and the grandmothers, they felt helpless. And this was very much, in particular, those within the refugee camps. They felt as if they had created this situation for their children. They felt guilty that they had brought their children out of Syria, out of their homeland, which they loved very much before the conflict, and they brought them to these refugee camps, and they were having to live this very difficult life. So they felt helpless, they felt guilty, they felt incredibly fearful of gossip. They trusted very few people because they were coming from these conflict zones, and they were worried what people would say about them. They would worry that people would say that they were a bad parent. They had a belief that actually a chubby child is a good, healthy child, and I think that belief is not unique to Jordan by any means. Food, sweet treats was a way of showing love to their children, but ultimately, because of the guilt and because of the fearfulness of gossip, the kids had complete control. So the kids were drinking Pepsi for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and babies were given Pepsi in milk bottles, basically. So Pepsi has a huge market out there, basically. And because the kids like it and the kids have control, the kids get it. And that's what's causing the rise in obesity rate within the children in particular. Next slide, please. So there with our call for action, it was a difficult one, and we developed this, as I said, we do co-creation, and we developed this with the target audience, this concept that motherhood is for life and parenthood is for life. And actually, by saying no now, so saying no to Pepsi or the sweets or the cake, by saying no now, you're actually saying yes to a whole range of possibilities. Because the one thing that the Syrian refugees and the Jordanian host communities cling on to is the concept that the life for their children will be better than the life that they're living. So we try to communicate that and try and work in those ambitions, those aspirations they have for their children. Sorry, next slide, please. So this was a image that actually was created during one of the co-creation sessions with the Syrian refugees. And as you can see, it's a situation where the mother is shopping with the child and the child wants to put sweeties in the trolley, and the child then has a fit and tantrum when the mother says no, and they're looked on disapprovingly by the elders within the community. So again, linking into that fearfulness of gossip and acknowledging that sometimes it is difficult to say no to children. And I've got 2 young children myself, one of which is standing at the door waiting for his breakfast, and it is difficult to say no to them, for sure. So this was developed by the Syrian refugees. And then this concept was discussed with the Jordanian host communities. Again, the picture depicts the mother handing a can of Coke or Pepsi to the child. The child's happy, and yet then the mother is looking worryingly at the elder, the grandfather within the family, who's clutching his heart. And the mothers really liked this concept because, again, it showed that even though the child's happy, by saying yes now, you're actually causing more health issues within the future, and then that child cannot achieve the ambitions that the mother in particular has for them. So thank you very much. Oh, sorry, yes. So we do whole family pledges. So as I said, we try to get a whole family commitment for this work. We do partnerships with retailers. So we don't want to take certain products away from them because the Syrian refugees feel that so much has been taken away from them already. So that is focused more on swaps. So getting people to go from, I don't know, Coke, full fat Coke to Coke Zero or something. And we are working with the government to try and put in some control and support mechanisms, such as the traffic light system on food products, because people at the moment just have no idea how much sugar is in everyday products. So finally, I just wanted to give a thanks to my colleagues. So these, in every country, I have a fantastic team of national staff who work with me, and they really are the heart and soul of the UN system. For me, working for the UN, it has no consequences. Probably people think it's quite a nice thing or it's a good thing to do. But actually, in some countries and in some cultures, working for the UN is fraught with danger. It's seen as a bad thing. It's seen as going against your culture, trying to make change happen when people don't want change to happen. So these people every day are courageous because they go out, they work with the communities that they grew up in to try and get change. And these are just a few pictures. There's about 30 people that I work with, national staff, who to me are the real agents of change. So thank you very much, and sorry for the disturbance of children trying to get breakfast. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rowena. That was really inspiring. I mean, you know, sharing a true example of change, Rowena, it was very thought-provoking presentation. I especially enjoyed your behavior change process, starting with history and culture, and leading to understanding how people can, you know, around you, including you, can co-create impact for more, and ending with the real world literation. You know, we all know that thinking about change is easy, but doing part is the hardest. So very inspiring. Thank you, Rowena. To those who are listening, if your question has not been asked, please bear with us. As I mentioned earlier, it will be covered in a United Q&A session right after our final speaker of today's event, Samir Deshpande. You can bring all of your questions for Samir using the chat function. Can't wait to hear him speaking. He's the Managing Director of Social Marketing at Griffith and Associate Professor, and he's driven by social change for the better that utilize both heart and head. He's an editor-in-chief of Journal of Social Marketing Quarterly, and have helped theorizing social marketing to promote health, family planning, and prevent HIVs and AIDS in India, physical activity in Canada, and reducing demand for illegal wildlife products in Southeast Asia. And he said Muhammad Gandhi, who just got beaten off by Dina half an hour ago, right, is his biggest influencer. Want to hear a bit about that. So please join me in welcoming Samir.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Javan. I would like to make a case for charities to adopt a hybrid social enterprise model as we face an uncertain future in the short and the long term. So before I go further on that line, I would like to attribute my thanks to Chris Purdy, who's the CEO of DKT International, one of the cases I will talk today, and also Professor Subhasis Ray and Chinmoy Bandyopadhyay, both at Xavier Institute of Management in India, who specialize in conducting research on social enterprise. So before we go any further, I would like to invite you guys to my first poll to ask you questions about what you guys think about the hybrid model.
We're reaching 50% of the participants answering the question.
Let's give them 3 more seconds.
Yep. TikTok, TikTok. Just another 5 seconds. Yep. Let me launch the poll results.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so 34% said it's a good idea, but 52%, like good academics, said it depends on the situation. And I tend to agree on both those points. But yes, there are 14%ers who think yes, but only a hybrid model, right? Not the full-fledged social enterprise model. Thank you very much. So let's jump into the discussion. One of the persons asked me, what is social enterprise model? Thank you very much. I'm going to discuss that in my presentation. So when I was asked to talk about talk about changing own tribe, I said, why not take it flip the conversation of, instead of changing others, how about changing ourselves first as change makers and using that as a way to change others? Because many times the change makers themselves are actually not equipped very well and don't have the right mentality to change the society. So, which is why I said, let's take this as a case to try to convince my audience whether you think that a hybrid model is the way to go in the future. Next slide, Javan. So why does it matter? Because let's take the example of Australia. We have 58,796 charities registered right now, and they're growing. That number is growing at 4% per year. So increasing number of charities are chasing the same dollars from government and foundations. Well, currently, for example, Australian government is trying to help charities during the COVID crisis, but even in this situation, this funding is not adequate. If you think from the consumer's point of view, there are opportunities waiting for us. They are making purchasing decisions that achieve both the twin goals of fulfilling the consumption need as well as doing social good. Consumer incomes are rising. Now, again, some of my conversation is pre-COVID, but if you take overall trend over the years, their incomes are definitely rising. They're willing to spend more on goods and services. Next slide, please. Very interestingly, the younger population, when asked whether you support the hybrid model or adoption of social enterprise model by a charity, they were very open to that idea. Now, Generation X and baby boomers are less so, but the younger Australians comprise of 45% of our society. They are going to become the prominent part of our society in the coming years. So in the future, the horizon for charities to adopt social enterprise seems more positive. Next slide. Interestingly, research shows that even beneficiaries expect good quality service. Even though they're getting it for free or subsidized, there is an increasing demand and for better quality. Society in general is also warming up to the idea that public-private partnerships are okay to manage a society. As governments, and some of you who believe that this is a neoliberal agenda, I am open to that criticism. But as public-private partnerships are on the rise, this adoption of hybrid model becomes more and more sense. And in the end, funding agencies are increasingly demanding outcomes and impact. To adopt that whole enterprise thinking allows charities to achieve those twin goals. And lastly, I want to justify this from a personal point of view, which is I'm a social marketer. If charities adopt social enterprise more often, they will realize the importance of social marketing, which is, of course, an important skill to have for the charities. But of course, I'm personally interested in that development. Next slide, please, Javan. So Wayside Chapel, a charity, and University of Technology at Sydney have come up with a very important report where they span out the various options available for charities to set their organizational structure. In the middle are 3 options where they could try out a hybrid model. I will get a bit deeper into that model and try to explain that using 3 case studies. So what I will do is talk about Wayside Chapel, the Sydney-based organization, as one, the Bangladesh unit of CARE International as the second, and an international summary of DKT International, the family planning organization, as a third one. And then after I summarize those cases, I will try to bring out some lessons that all of us can learn to adopt this hybrid model. Thanks, Javan. So before we go any further, to answer a question directly, what is a social enterprise model? It is a venture that tries to seek profit that helps nonprofits execute and fund their social missions. So this is not supposed to be contradictory to the missions. It is supposed to aid achieving those missions. So let's consider that aspect as we try to understand these case studies. So let's start with Wayside Chapel first. Next slide, Javan. So Wayside Chapel is a Sydney-based organization that provides essential services to those experiencing homelessness and social isolation. Just as a snapshot, they have in 2020 itself provided 482 showers and toiletries, 1629 low-cost meals, 533 people were benefited from clothing, and they are also offered around 300 instances of practical support. So what kind of social enterprise do they provide in addition to the charity arm as you summarize here? Next slide, Javan. So they run 2 enterprises. One is a heart cafe and the second one is a shop where they accept donations of clothing and provide, resell those clothes back at a good price. So these 2 arms are the social enterprise arm. The charity arm is providing help to homeless and socially isolated. How does this pan out financially? So let's look at the next slide as a summary of last 3 years of revenue and expenses of Wayside Chapel. So can we go to the next slide, Javan? So if you look at the 3 time periods, when you look at the revenue side, you can see that social enterprise is providing around 22 to 25% of revenue. The government funding support has gone up, but the private donations have gone down from 68 to 57. In terms of expenses though, although I'm making a case for social enterprise, I also have to be open to some of these negatives. So you can see that social enterprise arm seems to be spending a lot more money, almost equivalent to its revenue. So one could question whether they are really bringing in money for Wayside Chapel in the last year. But what's important is that they are helping the nonprofit to maintain a revenue and provide and reach out new stakeholders who then help the charity arm of the organization. Next slide, Javan. The second case I want to present is from CARE International. CARE is world's largest international humanitarian organization that helps families in poor communities. Poverty alleviation is their key focus. They have a large presence in Bangladesh. But other than providing the usual provision of services to ensure that the poor get access to various services, they also have a very vibrant social venture arm. If you can go to the next slide. So they have a unit called CARE Social Ventures. As part of that, they have a social business called Aparajita, or JITA in short. CARE works with 7 large companies, including Unilever, Bata, and Grameenphone. And what they have done is they have provided services to, employment opportunities to the poor women in villages, and have become micro entrepreneurs to sell products and services of these 7 companies to the consumers in those neighborhoods, using a bottom of pyramid model. So to summarize, they are working with around 255 women and 20,000 plus retailers, all in rural countryside, trying to reach the final mile customer. In the process, they have trained 3,000 women, and they have reached 17 million BOP consumers. So it is a case where a beneficiary has actually become a micro entrepreneur / employee. And so all 3 partners, CARE, the companies, and the beneficiary / employee women have benefited in the bargain. Thanks, Javan. And then lastly, let's look at DKT International. DKT is the world's largest provider of family planning, HIV, AIDS, and safe abortion products and services. DKT operates in 50 countries and has reached 48 million couples with these services. DKT's story is different from Bangladesh or Sydney because of its wide presence, because this social enterprise adoption has happened in multiple countries, and the story varies from country to country. So if we can go to the next slide, we see that in 2010, DKT decided to try out the social enterprise model. And you see that blue arm of sales revenue going up dramatically, while the funding source kind of stagnated. So over the years, the share of sales revenue, the social enterprise activity, has overtaken the donor funding ratio. And it has helped DKT to sustain its presence by doing its own business. But the story is not uniform around the world. If you can look at the next slide, countries like Turkey, Brazil, Philippines are become almost self-sufficient entirely based on sales revenue. However, the African countries are still need a lot of donor funding. So like Congo has 16% of social enterprise revenue, while Mozambique has only 14%. So rightly said, those who selected that 4th option, that it all depends on the market, the organization, the consumers, this slide actually reflects that diversity, that it depends on the market situation, the kind of products and services you are providing, that you may have to adopt, you may have the opportunity to adopt the social enterprise model, or you may have to fall back on the donor funding. If you go to the next slide, this slide also reflects where the donor funding is relevant and where the social enterprise funding can be appropriate. So even in a country like Turkey and Mexico, which is quite self-sufficient in terms of sales revenue, when it comes to ensuring doing startup projects or special initiatives, you still need donor funding. So I'm not making a case that donor dependency is passé. No, donor dependency is important. It depends on the situation. But if social enterprise funding can allow you to be self-sufficient, it is something to try out. So what I have done is I have given you a snapshot of these 3 case studies. So on the next slide, I would like you guys to come over and try answer my second poll question. And if you're not a charity manager, you can assume to be one for next 1 minute and answer this question.
Collecting the responses at the moment.
Thank you.
Just we'll wait for maybe another 5 seconds and share the result. Or did I just say 5 minutes? No, 5 seconds. Yep. Let me end the poll.
All right. Wayside Chapel seems to have the largest traction. Perhaps our audience is primarily Australian. That could be the case. Or perhaps they work very closely with the homeless and the vulnerable population. Thank you very much, Jeevan. So what lessons can we learn from these 3 case studies? And of course, the literature review that I undertook along with Chinmay and Subhasis Ray. So I've tried to provide a summary of my insights, my findings from these various research activities. Let's go to the next slide. Charities experience a problem with donations. There's donor fatigue, there's economic volatility, and governments are removing their tracking back with their responsibilities to fund charities. So donation volatility is an important reason. But there's also the other reason, which I have learned over 20 years of working with nonprofits and various government organizations, is the strings that get attached in terms of time boundedness of a project. It's always 3 to 5 years and then move on to another project, or the restriction in terms of what can I do, what can I not do. That can be very frustrating for charity managers. And the last one is such projects, because they are time bound, prevent the projects to scale up to larger, more volume, and trying to reach more people, which actually in the long run is where you start seeing the outcomes at the societal level. Because of these barriers or these challenges, several charities start thinking or considering the social enterprise component. So if we go to the next slide. So the triggers to transition in the minds of the employees and the management of charities is this desire to be self-sufficient financially, to get flexibility in terms of spending, and to bring some sustainability to the source of funding. Who does not like control over what we do? So social enterprise gives you that control and tries to provide more opportunities for innovation, for creativity, trying our enterprise aspect of personality. That strategic independence is far more relieving and freeing than just donor dependency. Interestingly, investors are very attracted to such initiatives, and even employees, prospective employees, are attracted, and so increasing the chances of better applications from employees. I like the last quote, which summarizes the spirit behind why social enterprise becomes attractive to certain charities, because the mindset shifts from merely relieving suffering to solving problems. And we are all driven by solving problems. Social enterprise perhaps gives us that opportunity to do so. Next slide, Jeevan. But before we jump into the social enterprise model, there are certain hiccups that one has to overcome. These hiccups could be from society, it could be from internal stakeholders, it could be in terms of what it takes to undertake such initiatives. So managing those challenges is important before completely jumping into this model. The first one is management of moral tension between the two goals of achieving the mission versus achieving revenue. There should be a clarity what comes first, mission, of course. And so that being the primary goal, how does revenue allow us to achieve that mission? I think one has to not lose sight of that particular tension. The other two are those negativities that sometimes employees can bring. One is the legacy mindset, the mindset that marketing or such initiatives are a waste of money. Why should I spend my precious dollars on trying to promote or communicate or persuade people to buy my social enterprise products? That can be limiting my charity's activities. There's the tension of I belong to a charity and I will bring the same ethos to managing the social enterprise. That can be a big barrier to the success of social enterprise. So these expectations have to be managed. On the other side, certain stakeholders might over-expect from social enterprise. They might see the revenue aspect and get excited by it. Again, there are hiccups in achieving that revenue, and so one has to be careful in what to expect. All right, next slide, please. Other than perceptions and expectations, there's the hard reality that staff members who have grown up in the old model may not be ready to undertake the social enterprise activities. So one has to upskill them by providing resources, by providing training. If necessary, one has to hire the right kind of people, at least at the top level, who can drive the charity in the adopted direction. Other than that, the organization as such has to be ready to undertake the new mission. So the management systems, the back-end processes have to be tailored such that they're ready for the new direction, that there's clarity on what is value that we are creating, how are we going to measure impact. And finally, as we transit to the new direction, what is our identity? What is our brand? These are hard decisions. They take a lot of brainstorming and discussions. We have all gone through that in our careers. We cannot skip those steps because without these steps, one cannot be successful in the hybrid model. Thanks, Javan. Next slide, please. So a good way is to ensure that we perhaps differentiate the charity part from the hybrid part. But before I go in that direction, let me present to you 4 ways in which a hybrid model can be set up. Thanks, Javan. So a report by Justice Connect, actually it's a non-profit for law organization that has put out this very useful report of social enterprise guide. They talk about 4 kinds of hybrids. 2 are integrated and 2 are differentiated. The integrated one is where the charity and the social enterprise arm talk to each other consistently. So for example, in terms of, so beneficiaries are in market approach, beneficiaries are the customers who pay for the product or services. DKT kind of use that approach, right? A blended approach is Care Bangladesh approach, where the beneficiaries became employees through additional training and support. On the other hand, Wayside Chapel used a bridged approach where the customers and the beneficiaries were 2 different groups. Many options are available. Whichever option makes sense to a charity is the one that charity should adopt. Thanks. Next slide, Javan. So if a hybrid model makes you a bit concerned, then keep it separate from the charity arm. Keep the social enterprise separate from the charity arm. And so let beneficiaries be the one who get products and services at free or low cost, and you create, promote awareness or attitude. On the other hand, let the social enterprise arm go after the target audience where you sell them products and services and promote them behavior by tangibilizing those behaviors. Next slide, please, Javan. So to kind of give you an example of what social enterprise can contribute to a charity arm, I like this particular summary that CARE Bangladesh provides. So CARE goes on to say, and it kind of supports some of the hypotheses that we have been discussing, which is CARE, the social enterprise arm actually enables CARE as the complete organization, the ability to provide, achieve a program impact, sustainability, and to achieve high scale or broad scale of its impact. It provides complementarity in terms of operation and financing, and allows, especially in those countries that need that aid. And finally, it allows or it promotes an enterprise approach and encourages innovation. So let me summarize all this in terms of do's and don'ts for charities. If you're a charity manager and you are a bit concerned whether this hybrid is really for me, try the hybrid model. Don't jump completely to the social enterprise model. Within hybrid model, try the differentiated approach. So keep the charity arm separate from the social enterprise arm. If it doesn't work for you, if you don't like it, if it fails, you can hive off the social enterprise arm and go back to your charity arm so that the charity part does not get affected negatively. The younger population, especially in Australia, is very warm to the idea of charities adopting social enterprise approach. Target them because they are a more ready to target approach audience for that particular activity. Do not jump unless you equip stakeholders with the right resources by hiring them, by upskilling them, and also manage their expectations so that they are ready for what is to come. And finally, we are all here as a charity or social agents to achieve our mission, achieve our passion. Let the social enterprise approach help you, enable you to achieve that mission and not create any barriers. So with that, I would like to end my presentation with the third poll question, just to see if my presentation made any difference to your thought process. This is quick feedback mechanism.
Waiting on the responses to come through.
Thanks, Javan.
Great talk, by the way. Just reaching, yep, 1/3 of the participants said, I'm not going to share the result now.
Tiring.
Reaching 50%. Let's wait for another 7 seconds. Lucky 7. Yep, just got another one. Yep. Brilliant. Let me share the results.
Wow, I was successful in switching of you to switch from your thinking. I feel very accomplished this Friday evening. Thank you very much. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Samir. That was really inspiring and as well as thought-provoking. I mean, you know, you've ended the series of Change 2020, and I can't really help to bring all the other speakers back and actually have a Q&A session. But what you've said all actually links back to what Dina said at the first time, which is courage. So
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm really thrilled to actually have the Q&A session. Let's bring our, two amazing speakers back, and I will let Alex, our co-chair of Change 2020, to handle this from now on.
All right, thanks, Jaywan. And again, thank you, Samir. Thank you, Dina. Thank you, Rowena. It was a great seminar that we ran today, and you had some great points all the way through. And we've got some questions that we'd like to ask you now. Rowena, we'll probably start with you, and we'll just go through the first lot. And the first one I want to ask was, where should we use courage when going up against a challenging task, i.e. mask wearing for COVID-19? If you feel that we want to be the change in the world, what steps do we need to undertake to build that courage up so we can start that movement?
Sorry, Alex, was that aimed at Rowena?
Oh no, that was Dina, sorry.
Beg your pardon, sorry.
Okay.
What steps? And someone said this earlier, I think it was J1, we all have courage within. From many interviews that I've done, that is absolutely evident. And what I encourage people to do, whatever the change is in a COVID environment, whether it's to wear a mask, not wear a mask, but to really stick to what you believe in, really reflect on past acts of courage and what it is you did and who supported you and what enabled you, who enabled you. So that what you're doing is you're actually collecting metadata on self, you're filing it away intentionally in your brain to be able to access it in future when you need to be courageous again. And when we think of mask wearing or not mask wearing, the COVID environment, you know, different people are going to require courage for different things. And so if you're finding that you're wanting to continue to wear a mask where other people aren't around you, oh, I beg your pardon, where people around you aren't doing the same, you may need to call on your courage to do that. You know, if you're finding that you need to connect more often with others when they don't seem to connect as often as you do, you may need to call on your courage to do so. And and there was a comment here from Ali talking about values, you know, are amongst the consistent themes. Stick to your values. You know, we know that when we can identify what our values are and when we understand what they actually mean to us, when we come to a hard decision, whatever that hard decision is, it's easier. Because if we call on our values, you know, that's your traditional North Star.
We've got another one here. Could you please tell us how you can go over the risk to be courageous? And when can you see that the risk is too high? Any tips on that?
Oh, wow. Such a good question. And there's no magic answer. You know, it's risk is different for different people. And again, I come back to your values. Really, when you're finding that you're thinking this is risky, come back to your values and really act on your values. Please don't get me wrong. You know, it isn't simple. You know, there are many times where I've grappled with making a decision because my values are being pushed, and yet I think the risk is high. The important thing in all of this is remain kind to yourself. Show yourself self-compassion and also be self-forgiving. You will know when you've made the right decision, when you take into account your values, how worthwhile it is, as well as risk. As I said earlier, there's no magic formula.
That's very insightful. Thank you. Moving on to Rowena, moving to your questions now. Now we've got one question here, and it was like, could you elaborate a little bit more on the co-creation research tool?
Sure. So I have to be honest, it's not very sophisticated because we're often doing it within very difficult situations and we don't have fantastic resources available. So what we do is basically we go into the communities and because of the cultures that we're working in, we work with the community leaders, the kind of elders within the community to identify people who can work with us, and we try to get a broad spectrum of participants. So it might be someone who's pregnant for the first time versus somebody who's got 20 kids, for example. We try to get a broad spectrum of participants. And then we do a series of mini workshops, you might say, with them, where we explore the findings from the formative research, we get their feedback on it, we get to understand if they agree or disagree with the findings, and then we work with them and we give them, basically it's a bit like sticking and pasting, we give them lots of magazines to cut out pictures from and sparkly pens and things like that, so they create their own messages and their own imagery, and then people other participants comment on them, and so it's quite a simple exercise in many ways, but it works, and most importantly the participants love it and they feel ownership and they're engaged with it.
No, that's great, awesome. And got another one here. Can I ask, have you experienced any resistance from the community in Jordan or Palestine?
In Jordan, no resistance whatsoever, whether we're working with the host community or the Syrian refugee population there, no resistance, very welcoming, very engaging, partly because, if I'm being honest, it's something new and it's something fun for them to do, because we try to make it as enjoyable as possible. Palestine's it's a different kettle of fish, and in Gaza we've had no problems. In the West Bank, it's a lot more complex situation, to be honest, in H2 where we're working. But the most resistance I've ever had has actually been previously when I've worked in South Sudan around gender-based violence. That's been a very difficult topic area to deal with. 1 second, Fraser, sorry. And in also Bangladesh, where actually local radio stations refused to play the adverts we'd created because we were trying to empower women too much, they told me. So actually I've had more resistance in other countries than in the Middle East, where I currently work.
Okay, and you also mentioned, so I'll pull this question up again, that you're talking about changing like issues like obesity, and then we have companies like Pepsi, you know, obviously selling the product, and in some cases, Pepsi is cheaper than water. But you also mentioned that you don't want to take away some of those luxuries because they've had a lot taken away already. How do you navigate that, and how do you make those decisions?
Yeah, it's very difficult. We know that we can never fully compete with Pepsi because they have marketing budgets 1 billion times bigger than our tiny budgets that we have to do our projects. So we do, though, work with governments to try and create sugar taxes, for example, at rates that would penalise the high intensity sugar products such as Pepsi. So they are forced to sell more their low sugar products. And just in relation, it's not just Pepsi, it's many commercial brands. Just to give an example, when in somewhere like Australia or the UK, they're actually changing and they're selling more of these low sugar products, but they still have these high sugar products to sell. So they go to the developing countries. And in somewhere like Jordan, they talk about this Western dream. They don't use these words explicitly, but they talk about this living for the moment, grabbing this Western dream. And so when you go to the refugee camps, they give Pepsi because in their head, it's about giving them this piece of the Western dream that they might aspire to. Because they often say, we want to get to Europe where we think it'd be safer and there'd be more hope for the family, basically. And so Pepsi use that, and they use that knowledge quite dreadfully, in my personal opinion, to manipulate the situation. So that's why you see babies being given Pepsi, because it's this slice of the Western dream that is very subtly being sold to manipulate people.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And I want to swing back to Dina. I've got a couple of questions for you. I have Ali, who said, emotional intelligence sounds important. Do you have any suggestions on how to cultivate it?
Oh, absolutely, Ali. Another great question. And EI is extremely important. And EI actually sits with the skill of vulnerability. So I talk about, in terms of how we feel, I talk about notice it, name it, and navigate it. So notice our emotions manifest in our physiology. So notice it. I know when I'm stressed, my gut churns. I mentioned before, even thinking of the story I was telling, you know, my jaw clenches. So what I recommend, firstly, notice what your body's telling you, because your body, your physiology tells you so much. The second thing is to be able to name the emotion, because we know that there are nuances in emotions. You know, am I feeling happy or content? Am I feeling calm or peaceful? Am I feeling sad or am I feeling grief? Am I feeling anger or frustration? And if we can name the emotion, we can then actually put strategies either to recreate the positive emotions or to manage the negative. We know that to be psychologically well, we need to experience a breadth and depth of both positive and negative emotions. So notice it, name it, navigate it.
And there was, I think you've answered this in the chat, but I'll love to hear it probably verbally is, and this is Adi again, so does an individual's immediate environmental contribution contribute to their courage and resilience?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Maria, we come back to you with this one. And this is from Ali. I wonder about the challenges of cultural versus addictive behavior. Do you need to change a strategy at all?
So in relation to addictive behavior, I suppose I don't do at the moment many projects where it's looking at, you might say, the hardcore addictive behaviors, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, etc. But the cultural aspect, like whenever we're challenging any behavior change program, whenever we're doing any behavior change program, that cultural aspect is absolutely vital to understand. Because I think the problem is a lot of people look at problems in isolation. So they say, I'm doing smoking cessation or I'm doing healthy eating, and they look at the problem just in relation to that. But the culture embeds how we react to it, how we think about it, our perception of risk, our perception of need, etc. So that culture and that tradition and the history, it for me is absolutely vital. You know, if you're going to somewhere like, I work in Yemen at the moment and Syria, and in those countries, you're trying to get people to make healthy food choices. But they're kind of thinking, so what? I might not survive tomorrow. So you have to understand that cultural context as well as that historical and the current context for sure, and not look at it in isolation.
No, fascinating. And Samia, a couple of questions for you. We'll probably finish up with you because we're almost coming towards the end of the Q&A session. But we had Antoinette say, are there any chances to change fiscal requirements to promote the hybrid model?
Yeah, I saw that question. So this requires government machinery to understand what it takes to report a social enterprise. In some countries, so in Australia, the answer is it's still not under in the cards, but in some countries there is a special recognition of a social enterprise model, and organizations are allowed to register as social enterprise as a category. And so the reporting mechanism, the fiscal requirements are tailored to that machinery. We need to bring that approach to Australia, which sadly doesn't exist today, to my knowledge. So there are examples worldwide, but not in Australia.
And we've got another one here. How can we manage existing donors under social enterprise model, or any tips on managing your existing followers under the model?
Can you repeat that, sorry?
How can we manage existing donors under the social enterprise model? We'll break it up into two questions.
How do you manage the existing governance?
Yeah, existing donors.
Existing donors in this. Yeah, actually, my interviews and literature review told me, and case study analysis, that donors actually support the social enterprise model, because one of the mandates of many foundations, at least, is even increasingly government organizations, is they want this donation to go much further than the dollar that they have donated. They would want this, the multiplier effect of their dollar being spent. And for that, you need sustainability, and that for that, charities need to think beyond mere donor dependency. So unlike the perception, actually donors welcome this move, and some of them explicitly ask charities to consider multiplication of that dollar. And so they support it.
Awesome. Well, that'll probably conclude our Q&A. We'll just finish at 5:30. So first off, thank you, Dina. Thank you, Rowena. Thank you, Samia. It's been such a fantastic topic to speak about how to build a following today, and how courage and the practicality of it, and then obviously looking at hybrid models and pulling it all together. Really love today's session, and also thank you for taking the time out to help us promote behavior change and behavior change practices. So it's greatly appreciated. So that pretty much wraps up today's event. We're coming to the end of 2020, and I guess we probably need a fair bit of courage moving to 2021 to see what's around the corner. We will be running the same event next year. We'll be running change in a digital format. We're not terribly too sure what the exact dates are, but we will be sure to email everyone to know what the next schedule is next year. And we really do hope that you decide to come along on our journey of change via these webinars. And we also have a lot more events on the social marketing website, griffith.edu.au/SMG events, where we usually have a whole year calendar planned out with masterclasses, free events, and the Change Conference. So please check that out and and see what might actually decide that you might want to come to one of more of these events. Anyway, again, thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. And we shall see you all for 2021 Change. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.